Yes, hello and welcome. This is another podcast from your friends at Radio 2, another Confessions download on the way. We have this week a concise collection including a soaring supersonic stick, some potty posh partygoers, nightly nasal noises, and a silly soup subterfuge. Yeah, that'll do. Anyway, who do you forgive out of this lot? This one comes from Guy. Dear Father Simon and venerable, wise, mighty and extremely attractive collective.
Hello.
They know Bobby's in. Without your forgiveness, I fear I am going to burn in the fiery pits of hell for all eternity for an atrocity I committed only 4 weeks ago. I've read Dante's Inferno and really must say that hell is a place I don't want to go. Hence this letter to you. I think he's giving us slightly too many powers here. Have you read Dante's Inferno, Bobby?
No, not this week.
Have you read it, Matt?
No.
We should do that as a book club choice because
Yes.
it's full of jokes.
Bags of laughs.
To put everything into context, says Guy, prior to the aforementioned outrage, I'd been rather enjoying myself in Thailand, where I'd spent 2 months of the winter guiding divers around the Similan Islands. As I write this, I hear Matt scoffing and shouting, "Not forgiven!" flaunting your money all over the place.
Yeah, quite right.
But please bear with me. Yes, I'd had a particularly wonderful time and developed a great fondness for the Long Island icy cocktail whilst on shore leave, but keeping some scuba divers from hurting themselves, or worse still, the coral reefs, can be a rather challenging undertaking. Matt, and in fact my own girlfriend, who remained in Britain, may assume that I was surrounded by bikini-clad Swedish nymphs. But given the focus of the dive school's online marketing efforts, it was more usually clinically obese Hungarian men in Speedos. But anyway, it wasn't all laughs, you know.
They're very small, aren't they?
What? Hungarians? Oh, Speedos?
Speedos.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
That's okay. At the end of the trip, there's a serious bit now, okay? Okay. Where laughter would be inappropriate.
Okay.
You go, okay, I'm trying to...
We'll turn away.
It all ends up fine, though.
Okay.
At the end of the trip, however, my dad was taken ill in Mallorca, and I hastily returned from Thailand in a state of anxiety. I arrived at Heathrow one evening, went to the family home to pick up some bits for my parents for the next day, and got on a 3 a.m. flight the next morning to fly to Mallorca and help look after Dad. I'd spoken to him on the phone just after touching down in the UK, and he was particularly keen on having his second crutch brought out to him to steady him up a bit. This I happily did, but it turns out that with some budget airlines, if it's not your own crutch, it's considered hold luggage, which you have to pay for. Now, do you know how much we divers earn, Father Simon? I'm afraid the answer to that is I don't know. Not a great deal is the answer, and Long Island iced teas don't come cheap, I can tell you. There's a lot of Hungarian men need to get trained before I can have another. So, channeling George Clooney, I pretended to have an injury to my left ankle. Well, there was more ham in my acting that morning than in the entire deli counters at Tesco's, and it's amazing what doors are open to you if you put a little effort into limping with a crutch. People made way for me. I was going, thank you ever so much. Thanks for opening the door. You're so kind. I said that on a number of occasions, and I was even shown through the priority lane at X-ray. On the plane, a delightful flight attendant took my crutch and stowed it in a locker above my head, whilst I clung dramatically to the back of the seat. Be careful, she said. These things can have a life of their own when you open the locker after landing. An old lady with a genuinely broken foot sat across the aisle from me. She seemed to be mocking me for the entire flight. I think she'd rumbled me. Upon arrival in Palma, the words of the flight attendant became quite prophetic. As soon as the plane hit the tarmac at speeds of around 200 miles an hour, a drunk, yes, at that time of the morning, a drunk Spanish hipster in front of me stood up to retrieve his bag, at which point a flight attendant shouted, "Please sit down!" He was obviously a rather touchy individual, as he immediately released a string of very rude Spanish invective in her direction, which didn't stop until the seatbelt signs went off, and I stood up to retrieve my crutch, which then proceeded to fall out of the overhead locker and hit him on the head. Picking the crutch up off the floor, I apologised profusely, saying, lo siento, literally translated as...
I'm sorry.
Well, the guy says, I feel it.
Oh, right. Well, lo siento means I'm sorry, but yes, you can It literally means I feel it, yes.
But it
Okay,
kind
go
of
on.
means I'm sorry, so it's the
Yes.
right thing to
Yes.
say. Anyway, I didn't feel it, but he certainly did. Anyway, I limped my way through Palmer Airport, where a fellow passenger asked me how much longer it would be until I recovered. I didn't have the heart to tell him about 5 minutes when I meet my older brother at the airport cafe. It was a long and uncomfortable walk for me, my rapidly failing acting skills, but when I met my brother, I bumped into the rude Spanish hipster again. Right in front of the fellow's face, I straightened up like Kevin Spacey in The Usual Suspects.
Oh, yeah.
Bit of a spoiler, I suppose, but anyway, come on, everyone's seen it, says Guy. He's Kaiser Sose. Handed my brother the crutch with a, "Here, mate, you hang on to this, please, will you?" And I walked briskly to the counter to get a cup of coffee. The hipster actually scratched his head like drunks do in movies, and then skulked off crestfallen, followed by a look from me that said, "Put that in your chorizo chorizo and smoke it, pal." I don't need to apologise here and now. Not to this fellow who didn't get anywhere near what he deserved that morning for being rude to a very professional flight attendant, but to any deity that might have taken note of my first foray into the performing arts and everyone in 2 busy airports and on a plane who made allowances for a passenger who looked injured but really wasn't. Dad is doing much better now, and the second crutch has really helped him get back on his feet. I, however, am struggling to live with my sin, a considerable number of which I racked up on that morning on my travels. Guy, thank you very much indeed. Well, you can understand how it happened. He didn't have a lot of money. He's taking the crutch over for his dad. He didn't want to pay extra. So maybe he just did what a lot of people would try, and then it's just put on a little limp and say it's for him. What do you think, Sister Bobby? How are you feeling about that?
Well, it's tricky because he was doing a good thing for his
doing a
dad,
very good
and he didn't have
thing.
much money. And also, the thing is about the airline is they would normally allow you to have it on for free if you were genuinely injured.
If it's yours.
Yes, but he wasn't taking it on for fun. It's not like he'd bought a big, massive musical instrument and was trying to get away with it. He needed to take his crutch to his dad, so he needed to do it. And let's face it, they would be willing to waiver it in normal conditions, so that's fine. So the airline aren't really losing any money. It's not taking any money away. And the fact is also there was the lovely thing of the Spanish hipster who got his comeuppance because, of course, the poor air steward couldn't, or stewardess, I don't know, couldn't deliver it, could she herself? She. Was she, wasn't it? She. So I'm saying, Guy, you are not going to the fiery pits. I think you're absolutely fine.
Okay.
You're forgiven.
All right, it's a tick in the green box. Go straight through. You don't need to declare anything from Bobby Pryor. What do you say there, brother?
Yes, so I'm obviously going to forgive here for 2 reasons, and it's both of them related to said Spanish hipster.
I bet you bumped
first-
into quite a few in your time.
Oh, indeed. First is that obviously don't stand... Who are these people who stand up as soon as you touch down? You're not getting out of the plane any sooner. Newsflash, until those doors open, you don't get out. Doesn't matter when you stand up, pal. Sit back down. And the other thing is Spanish hipster with your facial hair and your skinny jeans and your lack of socks. Absolutely forgiven. I would have been in your corner every step. In fact, I would have been keeping my eye on him the entire time.
You'd be thinking, I hope that crutch pops out and hits him on the head.
Absolutely. All the way. Spanish hipster.
And so therefore?
So, yeah, obviously forgiven.
It's time for another confession. Bobby, just take a seat there. You're very welcome. Now, here's tonight's tale, and it comes from... Let me just check the name, and have we changed it? Oh, yeah. It comes from Ben. Father Simon and the Wise and All-Seeing Collective. This confession dates back to the mid-'80s when a group of my friends were in the habit of organising summer balls. This being a time when meaningless hedonism and conspicuous self-indulgence were considered jolly good things and bound to bring enormous benefit to the economy. Good. Nicely restrained. This particular ball that forms the basis of this tale was one of a series which took place beside a very large lake in the green and pleasant land of the home counties. As for the dramatis personae, the principal character was the then girlfriend of a good friend of mine who, for our purposes, we shall call Elizabeth. Best described as a force of nature, aside from being breathtakingly good-looking, Elizabeth was also charming, cultured, and formidably well-educated, spoke several languages, and gave one the impression that she had never suffered a moment of self-doubt in her entire life. Having established this, the other distinctive thing about Elizabeth was the small but perfectly formed dimple, which sat square in the middle of her forehead. I suspect it was actually a scar from an early chickenpox episode or some other such childhood trauma, but if anything, it only lent to her very striking appeal. I think Ben's in love with her, by the way.
Hello.
What was significant on this particular night was that Elizabeth had decided to augment her jewellery for the evening with a small but very shiny diamond, which appeared to have been inset into the very dimple I have just described. I have to admit that the effect was captivating, but I couldn't help thinking a little risky for an evening such as the one that was sure to unfold. You will probably be ahead of me on this, Father Simon, but I had two burning questions at this stage, which I felt demanded an answer. So after the obligatory, "Blimey, you look amazing," next up was, "Is that a real diamond?" To which the reply was, "Oh yes, my Uncle Tony brought it back from Joburg for my 21st. I think the alarm may have been apparent in my voice at my next question, which was, "What have you got it stuck on with, super glue?" I received this answer: "No, my friend Jilly does stage makeup with the National Theatre. She got me this really good stuff." I can tell Matt's not going to have anything to do with this.
This is going downhill.
"They use it for sticking on prosthetics," she assures me, "so that diamond is going nowhere." Anyhow, the evening passed in a whirl of champagne, smoked salmon and tequila slammers, and the next time I bumped into Elizabeth, we were both heading for the fun fair, hired in for the evening's entertainment, which consisted, if I remember, of a Ferris wheel, dodgems, and that stalwart of any fairground, the waltzer, complete with strobe lighting and a range of classic Motown and soul stompers played at full volume over the PA. Of course, we both made a beeline for this attraction and breathlessly collapsed into the first available car the moment it came to a halt. As Elizabeth took a hearty swig from the bottle of champagne in her grasp, I noticed with some relief that the diamond was still in place. As the ride got underway, all was going swimmingly well until a burly fairground attendant descended upon our waltzer car, leaning over Elizabeth with a leer and a David Essex twinkle in his eye.
Really?
With a deft flick of his arm, he sent us spinning at a rate guaranteed to induce nausea in Yuri Gagarin. The centrifugal forces thus generated were enough to propel Elizabeth across the car and into my arms in a flurry of sequins and spilled champagne. It was this moment in time which has, for me, formed an indelible sense memory which has remained with me unfaded to this day. It consists of the heady scent of Chanel No. 5, the warmth of a female body in sudden close proximity combined with the shock of cold champagne over most of my upper body, and the spine-chilling sight of a small but perfectly formed diamond, seemingly in stop-motion movement, describing a perfect arc through the night air, away from its owner, glinting momentarily in the glare of the strobe light before disappearing finally into outer darkness. I pulled back and stared at Elizabeth in abject horror. OMG, she's going to freak! She will definitely demand that the ride be stopped immediately and that the entire staff bend their efforts to the retrieval of this miniature Koh-i-Noor diamond. Oh, hang on. She's laughing. Her eyes aren't spitting fire. She hasn't realised she's lost her diamond. Definitely don't tell her, I'm thinking. Please stay silent, brain. Don't tell her a thing. And thus it was that this particular precious stone was consigned to the greasy inner workings of a fairground ride. And so we disembarked from this particular show with Elizabeth none the wiser as to the loss of her precious stone, and me deciding I would either have to pick my moment carefully or never actually mention it at all. Whilst I was deliberating, Elizabeth announced that our next stop had to be the lake in order to honour an assignation to meet up with a group of friends for a midnight punting expedition. And so Elizabeth led on to the moonlit lakeside, with me dutifully following, still deliberately in the darkness over my agonising moral dilemma. What would you do, Matt?
Yeah, I would have lost her at the punting. That's what I'd have done.
Okay, all right, just checking. As we arrived at the lake and walked down to the jetty, it became apparent from the general helloing and jollity that among the party already aboard the first punt was our friend Graham. Graham was of a type. He played a lot of rugby and liked to make his presence felt in any social situation. He's the kind of guy that Matt wouldn't like. I am ashamed to say, Father Simon, that it was at this point that it occurred to me an opportunity might be presenting itself. As we neared the end of the jetty, I called Graham over to help Elizabeth aboard. He, of course, jumped at the chance to display his gallantry and sprang forward, hand outstretched in support and encouragement. But at the moment Elizabeth was fully committed to leaving terra firma, Graham did exactly what I was gambling he would not be able to resist doing. He rocked the punt violently, which should be a song, causing her to fall unceremoniously into his arms, much to his hilarity and Elizabeth's graciously concealed disdain. Unfortunately, in his exuberance, Graham overdid it a little, and another passenger who was making his way down punt overbalanced and plunged into the water. chaos now ensued as people clambered around the punt in order to rescue the man overboard. But eventually, with everyone back on, we began to make our way down for our voyage. Now, the scene was set, and once we were underway, all I had to do was sit quietly in the darkness as we glided across the moonlit lake and wait for the inevitable. And sure enough, Father Simon, in a relatively short time, the alarmed shrieks from aft of the vessel told me that the discovery had been made, and pretty soon the conclusion I had reckoned on was drawn. Graham was in the frame. "Oh, Graham, you're such an oaf!" was one of the more restrained observations that were heard to issue from Elizabeth and her female companions at this point. I have to admit that I was not without a nagging sense of guilt as the punt was dragged ashore, bailed out, stripped of its gratings and scoured stern to bow for the missing gem. However, I nevertheless enthusiastically assisted in the search operation and appeared appropriately crestfallen when the inevitable conclusion was reached and the diamond was indeed at the bottom of the lake. As dredging was not an option, though briefly discussed, all we had to do was reluctantly concede that the diamond was gone forever and that Graham was indeed a bit of an oaf. There was a point when Graham offered to pay for the diamond that I was prepared to come forward, but once this offer had been declined, I definitely decided this would be the version of truth that would forever become the dinner party story, and that's how it has remained to this day. So I need forgiveness, not for the deception played on Elizabeth. The diamond was lost one way or another. I just avoided an awkward and unnecessary scene with an angry fairground worker. Not for the unwarranted besmirchment of Graham's reputation. He's a robust individual. No, I seek absolution from the crowd of companions who thought they were about to enjoy a tranquil outing on the placid waters of a moonlit lake and ended up in a time-consuming and fruitless exercise in a punt, dismantling it in search of a diamond that was never there in the first place. I hope I can seek your forgiveness. Yours in highest regard, Ben. P.S. I also realise that it's a given Matt will have decided not to forgive from pretty much the opening line, context being more significant than content. Anyway, how well you know, Ben, how well you know. Sister Bobby going first, though, less predictable.
I don't want to take up your time, Matt, but very quickly, Ben, I'm not going to forgive you. I'm not going to forgive you because you could have saved this situation and been the gallant winner if right at the start you'd been honest. Obviously, wait till the ride finish. And also, that fairground worker would have been probably very, very happy at some point at the end of the night to help you look for it. That's what you should have done.
He's probably got it already, that
no,
fairground worker.
No, he hasn't. It happens all the time. They look for stuff and recover stuff and lost
they lose
stuff.
Diamonds?
No, but people lose their valuables on the Walsat many a time. So you just have to wait till it ends and then they clear it up and then you find your watch and your wallet, etc. So you're not forgiven because basically you turned the night upside down because you thought you were in with a chance with Elizabeth and you wanted to have the romantic boat ride. So I think it's because for your own interests that you didn't tell her.
I think
you're not forgiven.
Most people would have done the same. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, really?
Brother Matthew.
What is Elizabeth doing wearing a diamond on her head? It's flouting society's conventions because she thinks the rules don't apply to her. Looks like they do, Elizabeth, because it turns out gravity works on you, even on your punt, with your Koh-i-Noor on your head, and your prom, and your waltzers, and all of that. And guzzling champagne on the waltzers. Look at me. Who knows what I'm going to do next? Probably end up working for your daddy's law firm. That's what normally happens. So I am going to not forgive. No, I am going to forgive because probably best without the diamond, frankly. And obviously Graham's an oaf, but I think we can all agree with that. And if you decide to spend all of your evening scouring a punt, more fool you. So yes, I am forgiving.
We're at the folk awards at the Royal Albert Hall, and it's time we had a particularly specially commissioned confession from the folk guru that is Steve Knightley from Show of Hands. Hello, Steve, by the way.
Hello, sir.
And also in our collective, Michael is still with us. He's done these duties once before. Eliza Carthy is with us. Hello, Eliza. How are you? We were going to get a confession from Eliza, but she's done nothing wrong.
Nothing at all.
And Matt and brother Matt is here, just waiting to be cynical as ever.
Yes.
So, Steve, was it difficult to rack your brain to come up with something that you'd be prepared to confess to the nation?
I had a few.
And is this the only one that got through our rigorous compliance process?
There was the wheel coming off the car at Cambridge last year, but this probably is the best.
OK, Steve Knightley, what do you have to confess to us tonight?
Well, you have to forgive me because I've sinned. But as a practising heathen, I struggle with that one. It was in the early days of Show of Hands, before we had moved up the musical food chain and could afford such luxuries as single rooms in posh hotels. Typically, we'd end up in the local B&B, beloved of comedians and salesmen the world over. You know, the sort of place. They serve breakfast between 7 and 7:30, then kick you out. Right. Jimmy Shan was once given a tiny bit of honey, and I see you keep a bee. It's that sort of place, you know, mean-spirited.
I understand.
We just played at the Kendal Folk Club, upstairs in a pub, to an audience of about 40, which was good in the early days, 91, 92, 93, about then. And after a few pints and the inevitable curry, we found ourselves in the aforesaid B&B in 2 tiny, uncomfortable single beds. This is me and the great Phil Beer, separated by a little bedside table and a sort of shabby sink at the end. Phil is rather famous for his stentorian powers of snoring. And by about 3 o'clock, I was still lying there wide awake, totally unable to sleep, and he was thundering away. I think partners of serial snorers might well be familiar
They're
with
nodding
this.
knowingly now,
Yeah,
I think.
okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So in one last desperate attempt to silence him, I decided to put one of the wet towels from the sink on his face. Laid it gently, and I didn't really realise the dangers. Apparently this is a bit like waterboarding.
Yes, that's right. Phil, can I just say, Phil is listening to this. He's looking increasingly horrified.
Yeah.
Go on.
Anyway, I did this, and I fell promptly asleep, only to be woken about half an hour later by this terrible sound of Phil fighting for breath and life. I mean, he was gasping and wheezing, but it was just awful.
So he was actually dying?
He was, yeah.
Right.
And we'd already died that night in Kendal, as far as I remember. But so I whipped the towel off his face and rolled over, pretended to be asleep. He sat up, bolt upright, and I still don't think today that he knows that Show of Hands very nearly finished on a dreadful night in Kendal. Father Simon,
Yes.
I'm hoping to be performing live with Phil later, and it's he that really needs to forgive me. But if you could be kind with your words, and maybe you could secure the performance, bribery not being a sin and all. And otherwise, I've got a damp towel, and I'm prepared to lie as an act of penance. You can put it on my face, Phil, and for the duration of the Folk Awards, I would just lie there with gasping and wheezing. So I place my fate in this good panel's hands.
Okay, well, we'll go around our panel, and then we'll hear finally from Phil, as it was him that you tried to knock off, as it were. Not in that, no.
No.
You know,
Can you
tried to.
rephrase that?
Yes, that you tried to silence. Eliza Carthy, what do you? Are you shocked, and what do you think of that? Do you forgive him?
My mother used to be a very, very terrible snorer. She doesn't snore anymore. I don't know what happened to sort of make her better, but she used to be able to rattle the walls and the ceiling of the house, and I do sympathise, but just imagining the future with Show of Hand.
Show off hand.
Show off hand, yeah, just the one. I don't know quite how I feel about it yet, and I'm still processing the horror.
Okay. Michael Morpurgo, do you forgive Steve Knightley?
Probably, because snoring is terrible if you're not doing it yourself. It really is terrible. I mean, it's a crime. And crime should have punishment. And it seems to me that it's quite reasonable to put a really wet towel on. It would have finished it for good, wouldn't it? Why wake him up? Because he just does it the next night.
It's true, but we, as I say, we moved up the food chain, and we were on our way to single
What it
rooms.
shows, I'm afraid, is that you're really good friends, and you were going to put up with him despite his snoring. You haven't confessed anything.
Okay.
I just think
That's
it was
fantastic.
a totally admirable thing. You spared his life. I think it's fantastic.
Brother Matt, what do you say to that?
Wow, I was going to say the same, but now I think that I've got to balance this somehow. I mean, I've wished far worse on people who've snored and kept me awake than just putting a wet towel on them. So I'm going to forgive you, because I would have done this. In fact, I would have done far worse.
The key thing is, though, Phil, you were the person sinned against. You had the flannel on your face, which I don't think you knew about. What do you think? What do you say?
Oh, sorry. Good heavens, what was that? Do you know, Simon, I think there are worse things that have happened since then, but they are simply unprincipled and unmentionable. So, but I will indeed forgive Steve for possibly suffocating me one night in Kendal.
All right. Which is a relief. Thank you very much indeed, Phil. Thank you, Steve. They're going to be playing live later on this show, 9 minutes to 6. If you have a snoring confession, we'd like to hear it. confessions@bbc.co.uk. I suspect there are quite a few. Gather round. Oh, and the novice is in. Hello, Nigel.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Very nice to have you here. And here comes
be here.
tonight's confession, which comes from Alice. Thank you, Alice. Simon, and I'm hoping the very forgiving collective, I'm throwing myself at your mercy, begging for forgiveness for an act of unwitting meanness towards my friend going back to 2005. What makes this story all the more in need of forgiveness is that the unknowing recipient of my unkindness, let's call her Mavis, remains blissfully unaware of the event. I cannot help worrying that Mavis will one day cotton on, and for this, I feel I must now atone and beg for her and your forgiveness. In my defence, and in advance of retelling this story, I must mention that I had at the time of the event just given birth to my second child and was, as every parent of a newborn child will know, in a state that can only be described as somewhere between severe jet lag and sheer loopiness. My story begins on a chilly spring day in 2005. As the proud mother of a beautiful baby boy, I was keen to show him off to my friends. My 2-year-old daughter was having a day in nursery, and so I took the opportunity to invite 2 of my closest friends for a lunch and gossip. Feeling enthusiastic at the thought of adult conversation, my husband was at the time in the same state of semi-stupefied tiredness common to all parents of young children, and our once lively conversation was now confined to discussing who was the most tired or who had changed the most nappies, the usual stuff. I had changed my pyjamas and dressing gown for actual clothes. I cleaned the house, at least around the edges, and made some soup for us to enjoy after our planned long walk in the neighbouring countryside. So far, so good. As we returned from our walk, ready to eat our lunch while the baby slept, Mavis arrived unannounced. Now, there are some relevant things I must mention here about Mavis. She is a very dear friend, and someone once described her as a character. Aged 70, a retired matron, she is a formidable person with set opinions which she delights in giving to other people, whether they want them or not. Mavis is also a very strict vegetarian and has been so for the last 55 years. She never fails to remind people that she has not touched meat or meat products since she was 15 and that her body is a temple and is used to this, and she can smell meat products even in the most obscure food ingredients, and has on many occasions refused to eat a meal served to her as she could tell that some unwitting animal product was present and would not take the risk of poisoning her body after that many years of purity. We don't want to become an animal graveyard, do we? Her words, not mine. Okay. See, I've timed this rather well, I think, don't you think?
A little chortling going on.
Totally oblivious to the fact that I had 2 other friends in my house, she promptly invited herself for lunch, stating, "Remember, I am a vegetarian." I quickly checked the lunch I had prepared. Butternut squash soup and fresh bread and a fruit salad for dessert. Perfect. No need to dash to the shop or scramble together a vegetarian option. I felt relieved, and a lovely lunch ensued. My soup was a resounding success, and Mavis deemed it the best soup she had ever had, and could she please have the recipe? Feeling chuffed with myself, I went to the kitchen and started to jot it down. Now, you may well be ahead of me at this point. Well, this is the moment where my heart stopped and my palms were sweating and I felt myself becoming slightly dizzy. Right there in front of me stood the ingredients. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have not remembered? I had only made the soup that morning, and yet this had totally escaped me. After the obvious butternut squash and onions, garlic and potatoes, staring at me from the page was chicken stock. My vegetarian soup contained chicken stock. Not just any chicken stock. This was homemade chicken stock from actual bones and skin and stuff. You know, free-range, hand-reared roast chicken and all that, but we just had it the previous Sunday, and I felt panic rising. Any second now, Mavis was going to realise my mistake. Her body, her temple, would reject this foreign import, and she would be ill, and I had done it. I was responsible for spoiling her purity. It was awful. I realised I was taking a long time getting the recipe, and surely my friends would come and find me and see for themselves what I'd done. Quickly, I scribbled the recipe down, changing chicken stock for vegetable stock, and I handed it to Mavis, who left very happy. I felt ashamed and told my friends, who fell about laughing. A few days later, Mavis rang me. She had made my soup, but it hadn't tasted the same, and she could not understand why. She must be missing some ingredient. Did I perhaps forget something when I wrote it down? Could I go back and check? She painstakingly reread the recipe over the phone. I confirmed that she did indeed have all the right ingredients. Butternut squash, onions, garlic, vegetable stock. Yes, that's right, Mavis, that's what you need. And so it has continued for the last 10 years. Mavis makes my soup regularly and it never tastes as good as mine. She has demanded many times that I make it for her, as I obviously have a knack, but I've so far managed to escape by coming up with constantly new recipes for her to try. To add to my misery, Mavis is very kind in her praise of my skills and frequently recounts how she can never make her recipes taste quite as good as mine. So there we are, 10 years later, Father Simon. I've never had the courage to tell Mavis the truth. She would never forgive me, and clearly she has suffered no ill effects from the absorption of chicken stock. My friends have delighted in retelling this story often, though I must seek forgiveness for feeding my very strict vegetarian friend a non-veggie meal, though unintentionally, but also for lying constantly over 10 years, and mainly perhaps for sharing my shame with others and making her the butt of this joke, albeit in a friendly manner. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive a very tired new mother who was only trying to help. And obviously Mavis had invited herself round. So I think if it was a planned thing, Mavis come round, she'd have put in that extra bit of thought. But anyway, let's see what Sister Bobby, militant vegetarian, whose body is always a temple at all times and in all places. What do you think, Sister
Well,
Bobby?
first of all, as I have suffered this. I was vegetarian for many, many years until my technical assistant fed me non-veggie chili and I didn't know. So I've had exactly the same thing. What I would say to this for Alice, to beg and atone for forgiveness from Mavis, is really you didn't mean to do it. The other thing from Mavis's point of view, she might be dearly upset about what she has eaten. And I would normally say honesty in all circumstances. But I would say actually in this circumstance, because Mavis might be really deeply upset and horrified by what she'd done. And she has suffered no ill effects. She hasn't got an allergy or anything like that that's going to... I would let this sleeping dog lie in this situation. But also tell her, I know what the missing ingredient was. It's usually sage. Sage will make the difference to her chicken sticks.
What do you think? Will sage make all the difference there?
Well, I think the key is to have a really tasty vegetarian stock, one you make yourself and reduce down. You don't need to cook it for anything like as long as chicken stock, but you can have lots of flavours and herbs, and that would work really well. There were millions of people going to be looking at their radios and going, chicken stock, because I think we all knew that was what it was going to be. And I do remember that mind-numbing tiredness, even as a dad, not even as a mum. I do remember waking up at the bottom of the stairs with a small baby tied to my chest with a dressing gown cord, because obviously I'd taken it for a walk and fallen asleep on the stairs.
Was it your baby?
It was my baby,
Okay.
fortunately,
Yeah,
yes.
sure.
It was my eldest of my 3 sons, and they were all very healthy.
The strange thing was he was 40.
My goodness, very advanced. Well, she has made amends a decade on, that's a fact, so well done. And what was she going to do, maybe? Was she going to stick her fingers down her throat and be sick or something? Because it was some hours later.
I think Bobby's right, because also she said, it was a mistake, and she would be probably more just keep it going. Don't let her know.
However, she did say that she has dined out on the story numerous times. So she has had comic mileage out of this story. And for that, I am not going to forgive you, Alice. And Mavis, I don't know, I hope you're in a good state, because you're going to get your comeuppance, Alice.
Anyway, let's see what Matt's making of this.
This is clearly a case of no harm, no foul, even though there is
plenty of foul. Very good.
Oh, yes! I think in this situation, I'd have just said, I've got a super secret ingredient that I put in my soup that I am not prepared to share, and that would have fobbed her off. And to be honest, Mavis, no one was expecting you to come round, so, you get on your high horse and saying that the body's a temple. Well, tell you what, phone ahead. That way, it'll never happen again.
Book a table.
So I am going to forgive.
They were this week's confessions. Thank you very much indeed for being a part. Who did you forgive? Did you forgive anybody? Probably most, I would think, as we went through. If you have a confession for us, send it, please. confessions@bbc.co.uk. We'd love to hear yours, particularly if it's been hanging around for quite a while. More in a week. Don't forget you can listen to all our interviews on the iPlayer. For this week, we had a book club on Monday. Chris Cleave was in to talk about Everyone Brave is Forgiven, his latest novel in the Radio 2 book club. Bruce Foxton, him from The Jam, was in on Tuesday talking about his new record, Smash the Clock. On Wednesday, we're at the Folk Awards with a host of Folky Folk. Lifetime Achiever Joan Armatrading was on. The Unthanks were on. They got Album of the Year. Bit of a spoiler. There you go. And on Thursday, Nige offered Spiced Perfumed Shoulder of Lamb. Yes, every bit as nice as it sounds. Details can be found on my Radio 2 page. And if you've got this far in the podcast, can I suggest that you tweet, just to show how hardcore you are, by sending in this, which is undisputably the greatest flavour of crisp. Savoury vinegar. That's savoury vinegar. Thank you.